Hi everyone. Just get my slides up. Yes, that's me. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for coming this morning. Aren't you a good-looking bunch? I say that, but I'm actually extremely short-sighted. You're a sea of blurred faces, but I thought we'd start off on a positive note. A little bit about me. I wear a lot of different hats, but the one that I'm most proud of is that I am the worst reverse parker. It actually provides me with a lot of entertainment and joy, and anybody who witnesses me attempting to park also has a bit of a giggle. So a lot to cover in 20 minutes, so I'm going to get stuck straight in. But of course, first off, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to leaders, past, present and emerging, and recognise that it's a really important time in Australian history with the voiced referendum. And I personally hope that we get this right, and that this is an opportunity for all of us to vote on the sort of Australia and the sort of inclusivity we want moving forward. Lot to cover in 20 minutes. Here's my three-step plan. I always think you need a three-step plan to world domination. I'm going to talk about why things are a little bit crap when it comes to both diversity, equity and inclusion, and how DE&I can make things a little bit less crap, how workplaces play a really significant role in fairness and equity, but also how to make sure that artificial intelligence doesn't just come in and wreck shit, because that is what it has the real potential to do. So you're probably hearing a lot about D&I and AI and thinking, oh, I think it's important. It's a little bit annoying that everybody keeps talking about it. How do we get it right? Is this just, virtue signaling political correctness? And I'm here to kind of unpack the importance of diversity, equity and inclusion, and just being wary of artificial intelligence in the workplace and how it can undermine equity efforts. So, over the past 5 years, there has been this real uptake and surge in interest in diversity, equity and inclusion. And a lot of it's a bit tokenistic. We see photos like this, like people just putting their hands on stuff. Like, we are inclusive. We have all of these strange photographs and really kind of tokenistic and surface level commitment to diversity and inclusion. And quietly, most of the workforce is kind of rolling their eyes, going, do we really have to do this? And it cuts across all different types of diversity. And so, we've even got Barbie dolls kind of buying into it, going, we know we have to be diverse and inclusive. We'll put somebody in a wheelchair. We'll make a brown Barbie doll. We've got this shit sorted, nothing to see here. Similarly, with Pride, let's just colour away the bias and discrimination. If we have enough rainbow donuts and if we paint our stairs, that shows we are really committed. We are a really progressive and inclusive workplace. This is my favourite, Harmony Day. Anytime there's Harmony Day, there's just these photos of like different shades of brown hands put together. And a quick note on Harmony Day. Harmony Day is meant to be, observed elsewhere as the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. But when good old Johnny Howard came into power, he was like, oh, let's not talk about racial discrimination, a little bit confronting. Let's instead introduce Harmony Day, where we talk about our favourite Bollywood film, eat a bit of foreign food and say that we've got this shit sorted. So we're in a country which likes to celebrate and pat itself on the back as the most diverse and inclusive and multicultural country in the world, yet we have to dilute. We can't even say the very word racism. We can't even say discrimination. Instead we say harmony. There's nothing to see here, folks. Let's all put our hands together on the table, take a photograph, and we have ended structural discrimination. Well done, you can go home at 4 o'clock today. So I wrote this book, How to Lose Friends and Influence White People, because, I hopefully sell as many copies as Dale Carnegie did with his How to Win Friends and Influence People. And essentially it was to acknowledge that when you talk about confronting inequity, when you talk about structural discrimination, there's pushback. And that's the how to lose friends part. And so this book was devised as both an anti-racism manual and a diversity and kind of equity tool, but also, and I talk about managing tools, managing pushback from colleagues, managing pushback from power brokers, having to have those awkward conversations with, racist Uncle Fred at that family barbecue. And what happens when you speak out? Because historically in this country, those who do speak out often get punished. So that's kind of the genesis of my book. When I started becoming a diversity and inclusion advocate, I realised that this is really tricky terrain, because when we get past the coloured donuts and we get past putting our hands on branches and saying everything's fine, we have this real reluctance to be honest about where we are as a country, where organisations, corporations are, and where they need to be. And I'm like, let's cut the crap, let's call it out for what it is, and let's be honest about the journey ahead. Hence why I have quite a few friend vacancies. So if anybody is interested, you can hit me up. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. The evidence is huge. There's a mountain of evidence as to why diverse and inclusive organisations are better. And it's more than policies, programs, and headcounts. It's more than political correctness when done well. When done well, diverse and inclusive organisations are more innovative and creative. They have happier employees. They've got more productivity. They're more profitable, higher revenue, better staff tenure. There is so much evidence to show that diverse and inclusive organisations outperform less diverse organisations. Yet we still can't get it right. There's still a huge amount of pushback to change. And I'm going to talk about why some of that is. For too long, particularly in Australia, there's been a real focus on diversity initiatives just being about women. And yes, there's still an enormous amount of work to do to close the pay gap, to ensure that more women are in leadership positions and on boards. But diversity includes all of these factors: gender, race, disability, ethnicity, sexuality. Too often we have a pretty one-dimensional approach to it. And it's what I call, we often talk about, pale, stale and male, and we need to ensure organisations and decision makers aren't just pale, stale and male. And I'm like, yeah, but we've got to make sure that they're not just pale, stale, male and Gale. And too often that means that middle-class white women are the people who then get maybe one seat at the table. So rather than just lots of Johns in leadership positions, we might have a Joan in there. But that does not mean your organisation is diverse and inclusive, because it's not factoring all of those other intersectional markers. The other thing is diversity and inclusion are not the same. And it's amazing how many people I speak to who don't realise that there's a difference. And that it's unless you get both diversity and inclusion in a workplace that you get those results. The best way to kind of explain the difference is that diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. So just like wheeling in some people with disability, or grabbing in, hiring a couple of junior people with brown skin. Oh, look, we've done it. Look at our staff. Let's quickly take a photo, put them near branches, and we've got this sorted. The inclusion part is the safety, the psychological safety in that organisation. Are there opportunities for them to succeed? Are they mentored? What's the tenure like? Do people stay around? Are they able to bring their whole identity to work? Are they able to bring their perspectives, their skills? Are they really able to make a contribution? Too often in organisations, we hire in our own image. We look for somebody who's going to fit in. And fit in me is code for be like everybody else. And we know that when everybody is the same, you're not getting the best results. It may make for more comfortable Friday after work drinks, but it doesn't actually produce better results. So despite lots of talk about diversity, equity and inclusion, a recent report looked at those who've committed to diversity, equity and inclusion, published policies, made public statements, and found that 85% failed to meet their objectives. And I understand why there's a bit of D&I fatigue amongst employees. Go, oh, another Pride barbecue. Oh, we've got to do this. Another bloody form. Nothing changes. That's because it's not being done well. I'm going to quickly race through some of the reasons why the overwhelming majority of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies fail. They're tokenistic and they're performative. We'd say and do the right things at the right moment. We post a black square during Black Lives Matter. We send the memo at Eid. We put a Eid Mubarak thing out to our staff, but it's just tokenistic. It doesn't actually shift anything, shift the culture in the organisation. There's still this belief that, but the best person gets the job. And it's usually a bloke that looks like that who says it. And I'm like, really? because this bloke led the country and he's a knob, you know, so I don't think the best person gets the job. It ain't a meritocracy. Even those who are at the decision-making table who believe in theory or who say the right thing, like these dudes, diversity is a good idea, pass it down, diversity is a good idea, pass it down. Those who are at the decision-making table who are formulating these plans, who are thinking and orchestrating what diverse and inclusive workplaces are, often look like this. There are vague platitudes rather than clear goals. We want our organisation to be a safe space for everybody. It's like, thank you for the lukewarm hug. How about we want to increase our diverse leadership by 20% in 5 years? How about we're going to commit X amount of money to produce these results? How about CEO KPIs are linked to diversity and inclusion outcomes? Just saying you want something without a clear plan, I think employees are calling bullshit on that now, and they're realising it's not genuine, it's not really shifting anything. That's the importance of metrics. Few companies actually have metrics. They don't actually have a plan. We want this to shift. We want this to shift within 3 years. We want this to change. We want this revenue growth by this time. And this is the sort of money we're going to invest in it. This is the time frame. Most organisations, and I would dare say most in this room, don't even have diversity and equity kind of staff data. They don't even know the makeup of their organisations. They can look around and be like, oh, I think that guy speaks Spanish. But they don't actually know. They're not measuring their workplace. And if you don't count it, if you don't make culture count, if you don't make difference count, and you don't measure it, then you can't really look at whether things are changing or progressing. And so step one, most people aren't even taking that first step. Training needs to be ongoing as well. Most people aren't diversity, inclusion, equity practitioners. They don't know how to do it right. They will make mistakes. They don't realise that this is sort of an ongoing process and that the whole of organisation needs to be brought on board. Training needs to be provided to middle managers. People need to understand how to shift workplace culture. You can't just say it. You just can't put pretty memos out on special days and think that that's it. People need to be supported and trained as these changes happen. The other thing I often hear is, but nobody applies for the job. We get the same sort of people applying for the job. And I'm like, well, look at your website. If your workplace looks like a golfing convention for middle-aged dudes, well, you probably aren't going to get women applying. You're probably not going to get people with disability applying for jobs. You're probably not going to get people of colour applying for jobs. And so you have to rethink your pipeline. You can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. You can't just go on LinkedIn or ask your mate who they know is looking for work, because you have to rethink the sort of talent you're reaching out to and how you're reaching out to it. And if it's broken, fix it. Don't just sit and hope and pray for a different result. Oh, who put my book there again? Available at all good bookstores and a heap of average ones. If you want to sort of unpack diversity and inclusion more, I've dedicated a whole book to that. The roles you can play as an individual, because we all have a role to play individually, but more crucially, structurally, what needs to change. Because even our individual best efforts aren't enough when business, politics, the law, when there's sort of inherent discrimination that needs to change in those structures. But the second half, and a really important and exciting and slightly terrifying thing that's in the news a lot, and probably, some of you may have dabbled in ChatGPT. Has anybody used ChatGPT? Yeah, it's kind of exciting, right? It's like equally exciting and terrifying. So there isn't a agreed upon definition for AI, and it's more than just, I just say, it's like robots doing shit and taking over. It's like, yes, but the broadly a definition that many people use, it's a system of computer-aided solutions using text, data, numbers, images, sounds as inputs, and that uses complex mathematical algorithms to assist with administrative tasks, with decision-making, with text, with formulating ideas. And it's not coming, it's here. It's everywhere. Think about Alexa or Siri. And this is a really kind of clear example of how biases are entrenched in AI. We order a woman around to tell us what to do. Hey Siri, what's the weather today? Hey Siri, what time will the sun set, or whatever. Even Siri and Alexa are examples of how it's normalizing. And she's like, yes, and no matter what you say to Siri, she's really happy to help you. So just my little patriarchy kick to the nuts. I made Siri a British male voice. So just because I was like, you know what, that's who I'm going to boss around and tell what to do. And the reason AI is problematic, absolutely promising, and here to stay, I'm not a technophobe, is that its developers still look like this. They're still largely able-bodied, male, racially privileged, when they are the designers, and there are only a few really tech behemoths who are leading the charge here, when they are the designers, the thinkers, the creators of AI, naturally, the biases they bring to the table are going to, consciously or otherwise, come out in their products. And here's the thing, tech startups are being bought up by these tech moguls. And so AI really is monopolized in the hands of the Zuckerbergs, the Musks, the Bezos of these worlds. And we know that these egomaniacs have humanity's best interests at heart, right? They're driven by profit, they're driven by competition. And so that itself should sound alarm bells. And you may have seen in the media in the last couple of weeks, some of the creators or the godfathers of AI have come out and said, look, it's promising, it's great, we helped create it, but it's changing at such a rapid pace that it's outpacing us. It's outpacing regulation. We don't really have any parameters. We don't really know what it's capable of, but we're a little bit scared. And when the very people who created it have come out with these warnings going, we need a pause on artificial intelligence because it's probably a little bit smarter and faster than we intended. And it's problematic for a number of reasons, which I'm going to get into. But a huge part is because those who are behind it are, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're very opposite of what we're trying to achieve. And they're doing it at a pace that has the real risk of undoing any of the equity gains we've made in the past 2 decades. So a few years ago, and here's a good example of it, Microsoft released a chatbot called Tay. And the idea was that Tay would join Twitter, her Tay Tweets was her handle, and that she was going to, by understanding and kind of crunching all the data of the internet, sound like a person and sound like the internet. This is what happens when a machine can triple speed kind of and regurgitate the information that's fed to them. And this information is largely problematic because within 16 hours, Tay became supportive of genocide, said that feminism was a cult and a cancer. She became a racist, ableist, sexist mole, essentially, in 16 hours. And honestly, it took most of my relatives, at least 20 years before becoming that. And so Microsoft had to withdraw Tay because she sounded too much like the information that was out there. And the information that was out there is problematic, inflammatory, and discriminatory. So when it comes to HR and AI, again, really promising. AI can take the tedious task work, the monotonous task work that HR practitioners have to deal with. And so according to a Mercer report, 88% of companies globally use some form of AI. So it's not to say that this big bad thing is coming, it's here, we're using it. And so we're at the point where we need to be aware of it and we need to sort of approach with extreme caution. So they can automate almost every step of the recruitment process, whether it's going through CVs, shortlisting, skills matrix. It's super handy that you don't have to have someone kind of licking CVs and going through it. But the most common form of bias in the recruitment process because of AI, again, is because it relies on data sets that are inherently biased and inherently unequal. We for so long have been trying to look at workplaces and look at the problems of workplaces where they are exclusionary or discriminatory towards women or towards mothers or people of colour or people with complex ethnic sounding surnames. So these are the historical data sets that these AI programs are using. And so that's the lens in which they're assessing CVs and recruiting. So it's not helping. It might be making things faster. It just triples the speed of discrimination. It makes it a whole lot faster to get to problematic conclusions. And remember the picture of the blokes I sent you before, the Zuckerbergs, Bezos, Gates. Whether conscious or not, those who design these programs bring their biases. Again, I'm not saying that everybody's an evil practitioner. I mean, I am saying Musk is, but I'm saying not everybody is. But they bring their inherent biases to the way these programs are designed. And then when we place them in our organisations, that's the lens in which they make decisions. Yes, it saves time, but it's problematic. And a good but worrying example of that was a few years ago, Amazon was one of the first, because they're also a pioneer in this space, to use AI quite broadly in its recruitment process. And then it was belatedly found out that it was actually penalising female CVs, penalising CVs that even had the word woman or any gendered language. And that was, they just came out, were like, whoopsies, we're sorry about that. Women were being penalised simply for being women, using she, her, or the word woman in a CV. So there are lots of promises, including this program. But I want to talk about the promises that you should immediately chuck in the no thank you bullshit bin. Because now some AI programs are coming out and making the assertions or making the promises that we can counter bias. We can help make your organisation more equitable. And again, while companies may not be acting in bad faith, there's really little accountability. There's little proof about how these products are built, how they're tested. There's very little transparency on the sorts of training, who's behind it, on the sorts of training they have. We don't know what their data sets are. We don't know how exactly they're countering bias, but they're making these promises. And also by claiming that racism and sexism and ableism, that's just, we can fix our data set and that will fix the problem, also reduces these big structural issues to a data set. And we know that's not how discrimination works, because structural discrimination is far bigger than one HR department, far bigger than one workplace, far bigger than one well-meaning, if not slightly diluted, artificial intelligence program. So the way that some of this technology is now being marketed, because it is being criticised as problematic, it could end up as a dangerous source of misinformation about how recruitment can apparently solve all of the world's problems. Just subscribe here and put your credit card details in. So I'm here to tell you that AI is not a silver bullet. It can't be ignored. It's here to stay. But you can't just get rid of discrimination with a 100-word prompt. It's a dangerous example of techno-solutionism. And that's turning to technology to provide quick fixes for what really is deep-rooted discrimination. Okay. So how do we make AI, as I wrap up, how do we make AI work for us? Because it is here to stay. It is absolutely helpful in many instances. And how do we embrace it, but also have a kind of a healthy dose of skepticism? Firstly, we need more policies and legislation. AI broadly, let alone in an HR sense, it hasn't been scrutinised by ethicists, by policymakers, by lawmakers. We can't just blindly trust this technology. We also need training for those who work in HR departments and recruitments on how to use AI. Some organisations that are larger are actually having an AI HR specialist, somebody who comes with AI training and can use that, but crucially only use AI as one data set. We can't just let the crunching come up with the solution because we know it's problematic. We also need to demand that the vendors and the developers, they're transparent with exactly how their product is devised. Perhaps also providing training to workplaces, but make their data and their algorithms transparent so we know exactly what we're buying into. I mentioned the AI specialists in HR, obviously for larger organisation, but crucially we need to know that this needs to come and happen alongside other systems of change. That AI isn't going to end structural discrimination. It's not going to sort all the evils of the world that have been playing out, whether at workplace levels or society level. An algorithm is not the sole answer. So my takeaways. The best organisations are diverse and inclusive. It's indisputable, it's backed by fact, but you need to be both diverse and inclusive and do it right and not be tokenistic. AI as it stands will topple equity efforts. So we absolutely need to proceed with caution. You can't turn our back on AI, it's too late, it's here to stay. And yes, it can be convenient and an efficient way to build on DE&I, but it also has the capacity to absolutely undermine any equity efforts of the future. So they're the 3 points. If you're going to take anything away from this, it's that DE&I is profitable, it's innovative when done well. AI is helpful, it's here to stay, but we need to proceed with extreme caution and a healthy dose of skepticism before embracing AI. I won't have time for questions because there will be the next speaker. These are various ways to get in touch with me. Do get in touch if you have a question, more so if you have a compliment. You can reach me via any of those avenues. Thank you so much for your time.